Welcome back to the Security Unhappy Hour, where we bring together a group of security professionals and naturally cheery folks that we are to discuss topics in the cybersecurity community, share knowledge, learn, teach, and exchange ideas. Now, before we get started, it's important to point out that the views and opinions expressed on the Security Unhappy Hour and our related websites are those of the hosts, guests, and authors, and do not necessarily reflect the official position or opinion of any one company. Now today, my co-hosts, Lisa Bradley, Katie Noble, Krobe, and I are going to talk about cybersecurity researcher motivations. We'll briefly discuss the types of security researchers and some common motivations. We have a special guest, though, today. Jack Cable is on to talk to us about his experiences as a security researcher. Jack, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Definitely. And first of all, thank you for having me. Glad to be on here, talk a bit about security. So I come from a bit of a different background. So I'm currently a college student. Sorry, my Teams is going in and out. Just making sure you can all hear me.
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay. We can cut that part out. Yeah, so I'm a college student studying computer science at Stanford. I've been in the security space for a couple of years now, got into it through bug bounty programs. So somewhat accidentally, when I was a sophomore in high school, I'd been coding for a few years and was looking at a financial site, realized that I could send a negative amount of money to other people on the site. So I knew that was a pretty bad vulnerability, even though I didn't know much about security. So I was able to tell them about it through a bug bounty program that they had, and kind of just got really interested in security from there. Did more about bug bounties and got further into security. So now I'm at Stanford. I'm currently working for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, so where Katie used to work, working there on election security, which has been a lot of fun.
Wow.
Yeah, that must be busy right now.
When I was 16, I was drinking Jolt Cola and playing D&D in the basement.
Yeah, I never
Only
knew
cola,
that.
huh?
I never knew that about you, Jack. I always kind of, I guess I didn't realize you could send negative money to people, but that is amazing.
Yeah, neither did
it
I.
Actually, like take out money out of the bank account?
So this was, it was a cryptocurrency website. So it would let you kind of like take money from their accounts. So yeah, you'd be able to, like, you'd have to go through an approval process if you wanted to withdraw, but yeah, pretty serious vulnerability.
Oh yeah, that's pretty cool. Did you get paid for that one?
I did. Yeah, they did. Yeah, they were really great to work with, and kind of would encourage me to keep doing this.
Well, thanks for joining us. It was really great to have you. I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. Katie, I wondered if you could start us off by talking about the different kinds of researchers that are out there. And Jack, please feel free to chime in as we go along. If we're getting something wrong, especially, please chime in.
Yeah. So this is kind of a topic that's near and dear to my heart because it's sort of what my background is. So those of you that know me well know that tech is not my background. Actually, I have a degree in psychology and religion and did human behavior analysis for many, many years for the US government. And so understanding like what makes people do things and motivations and kind of why people tick is sort of my thing. So it's kind of important to understand that when we categorize researchers, we're kind of giving these 4 big buckets, but that doesn't mean that people fit nicely into each one of those big buckets. And there is a difference between types of researcher categories that researchers tend to fall into and motivations. So there's 2 kind of different categories there. So the first thing to kind of keep in mind here is that there are four big researcher types. So the first one we refer to as the quiet helpers. So the quiet helpers are usually people who happen to stumble across something and then they just kind of go and drop it and give it to you, like give it to a PCERT or a government agency or whomever they may give it to. They're not actually following up. They really don't much care what happened, and they're usually not real big into like getting a CVE or even, getting a bug bounty or anything along those lines. Yeah, I know, right? So the next category is really the recognition seekers, right? So these tend to be people who are like looking for something, whether that's affirmation in the form of like they're writing a research paper and they want, that positive affirmation that what they found is real. Maybe they're looking for a CVE. Maybe they're an academic, and this is kind of their job, and they sort of live and die by publishing. So that they tend to be the recognition seekers. Then you have what we kind of call the professional bug hunters. So professional bug hunters are, and you can kind of be, this can be a little bit of a hybrid, because you can be a professional bug hunter and also have a day job. That doesn't mean that that's what you do all the time. But people who tend to target their research around bug bounty programs. So they go through and find a list of companies that have good bug bounty programs, and they'll specifically target some of their security research around those bug bounty programs. So then the last thing is we refer to as, you guys make me laugh here. The last category really is the institutional partner. And typically institutional partners can be things like coordination centers, or maybe a customer, or maybe another PCERT happened to have found something and they're going to tell you about it. But there's no other additional motives there. Their job is really just to kind of be a partner here and tell you about it. So those are kind of the four big categories of researchers.
Jack, is there anybody that's missed?
Or I want to know what kind you are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's.
You fit in one of the categories or all the categories? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the background I came from is with like just the, I guess somewhat of a professional, even though for me it's been kind of just a like ongoing hobby. But generally, just kind of coming from the angle of, okay, so let's see, like this company has a bug bounty program. Let's just see what I can find, and going from there. So just kind of acknowledging that, that's what you're looking for, and you want to, of course, find vulnerabilities, both for kind of the just being curious and seeing what you can find. And then for me, at least, that's the primary motivation. And then there's other factors such as getting paid for it is nice, recognition, all of that makes it something that's enjoyable to do.
So, Jack, I'm just curious. I've met a lot of different researchers, and some of the researchers specialize in a certain technology or software or hardware, and others of them just kind of stumble across things they're curious about. So kind of where do you fall on that spectrum? What do you intentionally go out and seek things? Do you have a specialty?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've got into this through, since like most bug bounty programs are web focused, got into it initially through there. So I've done, fair amount of web stuff. Then got into a little to some mobile, for instance, reverse engineering, as well as some cryptography stuff.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. There's so in like the psychology world, back in my old job, a long time ago in a land far, far away that we won't speak of. Before CISA, there was life before CISA. So we worked on human behavior and kind of trying to understand why people do the things that we do, and we boiled it down to basically there are four categories of decision making, and typically the acronym is MICE. And so MICE is, I know, right? Yeah. So MICE is money. Let's see if I can even remember them. Money, ideology, coercion, and ego. Right. So those are the reasons people do things. But, I don't know that it's as easy as that. That feels very like simplified. So there's a lot of kind of documentation out there, and I really loved the CERT Guide to Coordinated Vulnerability Disclosure outlines what they call the 5 Ps. And so the 5 Ps are protect, puzzle, prestige, profit, and politics. And I think that kind of better explains the motivation of security researchers, because it really appreciates the puzzle aspect of it, the trying to understand what's going on and just trying to fix it. I think there is more than just kind of money and coercion and ego. You know, there's kind of this natural curiosity that falls in there too. And I don't know, Jack, I've always seen you as a puzzler.
Yep. Yeah, I think that definitely, like, just the curiosity component, as well as you mentioned protecting. I think just in general, it doesn't have to be about money or ego. It can just be about wanting to make things better. And so I guess that could fit into the ideology one, but really I think it's what motivates people is complicated, and I think for everyone really it's different. But at least for me, just knowing that, for instance, taking some of the own experiences that I've had with disclosing vulnerabilities, for instance, with election systems, and working to help both those companies and as well as, say, states, local governments be better at this, start their own vulnerability disclosure policies, just to kind of improve the state of things.
I would think that it could like evolve a little bit too as you grow through your career. Like maybe you just first started as fun and then you got some money and then you think, okay, this is cool. Maybe I'll make some more money. And then, you realize, wait, I could actually, put this on my resume or help me get into school. And, and then you go from there like, oh, wait, now I want a job. I know sometimes some researchers want to get into the company. So they start to, work on finding issues in the company in hopes that they'll want to then hire them. Some of our friends, I think, here hired researchers in the past to be part of their company.
For sure, yeah, I know so many people kind of who got into working as a security professional at a company by doing their bug bounty program. So I think it's a really great way for people to kind of get noticed, but also for companies to find people who already have been improving their security. It's kind of a no-brainer that you should be hiring some of those people.
Yeah, there's like a whole bunch of I always kind of get annoyed when people talk about life as if it was cut and dry. Like you can just put people into a bucket and say this person is this way or that person is that way. It's kind of one of my big pet peeves. I think the other thing that really kind of bothers me is when people like industry and government agencies and certs, like they talk about researchers, but rarely does anyone talk to researchers. And I find that that's really interesting. There's kind of this, like, we talk about the mythical researcher. And then, when somebody says, well, did you ask them? It's like, oh my God, I guess I should have done that. It's kind of like this weird, you talk about people, but then you don't talk to them.
I think that that's like an evolution too, because in a previous job, getting on the phone with a researcher was like a no. They never wanted you to do that. And now I'm like, oh, just hop on the phone and let's make sure we could really understand what's going on. And most researchers are up for it. I have found a few though that will say, I already gave you enough information. I don't want to spend any more time. But the majority of the researchers are like, oh yeah, no, I want to make sure you understand this, and you protect your customers, and so I'll gladly hop on the phone with you, which I prefer that if I'm struggling. Yeah, just call, email. It's not that hard. You're still people.
Yeah, I want to go back to talking about the employing researchers or hiring somebody that you find has reported good vulnerabilities. If you were going to give advice to somebody that was coming to work for a company that they've reported vulnerabilities to, a vendor, or even a government agency, coming from the outside, working purely as a researcher, and then coming in to work for a company, what advice would you give them about how to acclimate to that environment?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely you only see a sliver of what's going on from the external researcher component. I'm sure you can see vulnerabilities that are there, but you miss, I think, a lot of the context and kind of reasons that may or may not make something more severe. So I think getting familiar with what matters to a company and what realistic things are controlling their decisions can go a long way. So for instance, just going to the election space, there's a lot of really hard things about either company election official. And I think the more you can understand that context that drives some of these decisions, for instance, that if they want to vulnerability, they have to get their system certified in a lot of cases, and that can add complexity to fix vulnerability. I think that if you can understand really the context that drives these decisions, then you can be more effective if you are hired for that company.
Yeah, I was wondering.
I'm sorry. You know what's interesting, Josh, is that I dealt with researchers coming in and then working in the company, and it was sort of like they still wanted to do their own research, and sometimes that's a little difficult because sometimes they're doing research and on their own, which you want them to do. That's why they became who they became, and that's sort of, you don't want to lose that passion. And especially if it's something that's not necessarily related to your business, usually companies will allow that. They may not, but usually they do. But what I found is that sometimes they find issues with your customers, and then that could cause some problems because
I have issues all the time.
Yeah, like they because then even though they're talking to this customer on their own, that customer knows that they already have an established relationship with especially the PCERT team, and they're like, hey man, what's going on with this person who found an issue? Like, aren't we going to work together? We're like customers. And so it's really interesting to make sure that there's flexibility on both sides, as the company is hiring and the researcher, to adjust to this new world of living together. It can happen, and it's just more of a getting a good understanding when you first join of how that's going to look.
So I was curious to steer it away from work for a moment and to touch on Lisa's earlier point about an evolution of somebody throughout their career. I was wondering, Jack, now that you're studying computer science, are you able to have you built upon your experience with web app kind of testing, or have you gone a different direction with what your field of study is?
Yep. So I think, yeah, definitely there's kind of an evolution in what you focus on. Yeah, with me at least, at Stanford, I've been studying more of the theoretical side of computer science, and that includes cryptography and other kind of formal ways of thinking about security. So it is, really interesting to get kind of that perspective. Of course, there can be a bit of a disconnect between kind of like what's practical going on in industry and then the cryptography research that happens. But I think I really like all of it, and think that you almost in some ways need both perspectives of like combining that in a lot of ways. Like when you're designing a system, you need to know the theory, and it needs to be sound. But then, of course, that doesn't matter if your implementation goes bad. So I think that, it just has been really useful to kind of get both of these perspectives. I think a lot of times people talk about like how needed degree. Well, I think that's very true that you don't need it. I do think that having just like a more complete background, fuller picture of everything that's going on, fundamentals, is very useful as well.
Because Krob asked about like the evolution of your security studies and in college now, and like I have a curveball question for you, Jack. I hope you're ready for it. I know you are. Okay, what class have you taken that you've absolutely hated? You're such an affable kind of guy. Every time I talk to you, you're like, oh, I loved this. I love that. I love this. I hated history of the Soviet Union. What class have you taken that you've hated?
That is a curveball question. I mean, there's none that I've hated. I think that's not what you're looking for, but like there aren't too many requirements, at least. But there are. Sure, there's some writing classes I had to take that weren't my favorite.
No! I'm a math major, so haha. I'm Krob, sorry. Totally get that. So are there cybersecurity classes? Are there hackathons at school? Like what is in the curriculum now. It's like cool. Like you could learn how to be a hacker at school.
So there is some. I was a little surprised actually at that there still isn't too much. So for instance, at Stanford, there's one security class really, like introduction to security. There's like two that are cryptography, but of course, when you're doing that, it's more theoretical. Probably the most practical one is actually one that I've been a TA for the past 2 years. It's called Hack Lab, taught by Alex Stamos, as well as Rihanna Pfefferkorn from the law school. And we teach both like very practical side, pen testing, lots of different fun areas, as well as the legal side. So really, I think that's kind of the most practical it gets. And I think that's really useful to in order to teach people on the practical side, and that's intended for even non-computer science people. So about half the class is either policy or non-STEM students. So I think that's really great. But yeah, there does have to be more. I think that this is something I wrote about a while ago, that security needs to be a requirement for computer science programs. But right now, there's just I have like one school out of the top 20 in computer science offers or requires security to be taken by computer science majors.
We don't deal with lawyers at all. I don't know why they're teaching you about that stuff at all.
No, there's no overlap.
Well, and I'll highlight that is one of the reasons we will have so much work as a security community, because no one's teaching the fundamentals, helping to circumvent them early in the process, giving people good skills and a good outlook. That's sad.
So I was thinking about the motivations again, and I was thinking about sometimes how I try to guess the motivations of the researcher when I'm working with them, so that I guess that because it's a little nerve-wracking when a researcher comes to you, because you get a little nervous. Are they going to disclose? Are they going to write up a blog? How much attention is it going to get? Are they going to give me a deadline? And meanwhile, in the background, if you give a deadline, we're like scrambling. Like, what if we just released a new version and then all of a sudden a researcher comes in and says they want it fixed in 30 days, and you know that it takes 30 days just to build the system, let alone to get it in. And so there's so much work and things going in the background. So sometimes, you know, we're having to sort of guess, like, what are the motivations or how this person's going to work with, or if it's a repeated person, that's usually a good thing, because then we sort of already know that. But I mean, do you ever think on the other side, like, maybe it's I don't know if it's nerve-wracking for you, but do you know how nerve-wracking it is for the other side sometimes too? I'm just curious of what you think of the other side here, since we're all here.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I've worked like kind of on the other side in some cases, like at the Defense Digital Service with some of their bug bounty programs. But yeah, I hadn't thought too much about kind of this perspective where like the logistics of like each individual researcher, you kind of have to think about how best to handle that. And I guess it just kind of points to like having some standard way of going about this to set expectations, which I'm sure that your companies do have. But I think that's really helpful just to kind of set the ground stage and have everyone kind of coming at it from the same perspective, knowing, say, like after X amount of days that this can be disclosed, and kind of thinking through that. But I definitely think that wherever we can have just people on, like both of these sides, the reporters and people running the program, is better understanding like how best to communicate with each other, how everything works. I think expectations can be better managed there on both sides then.
Okay, so me next. All right, so we've been doing a lot of, where I work, we've been doing a lot of academic focus groups. So we're doing these listening sessions basically where we invite, I know, because we want to, because it's that We're talking with people, not to people.
They're focus groups with academic researchers.
There we go. Yes, there we go. Focus groups with academic researchers is a much better way to put it. And so because we want to change that mindset of talking about people versus talking to people, we've been bringing in like a couple people at a time and saying like, okay, tell us all the things that we can do and how do we do this? And so like I wanted your opinion on how companies can incentivize positive ethical security research. So what are your thoughts? What can we do?
Great. Yeah, I guess I'll start with just like the basics, which, yeah, again, this is something that doesn't apply to any of your companies, but applies to most companies out there that aren't as mature, and that you just need to have, of course, this is nothing new to anyone here, probably anyone listening to this, but just you need to have a front door for researchers to report vulnerabilities to you. So I think a great example of this is CISA's recent binding operational directive requiring all federal civilian agencies to start a vulnerability disclosure policy, essentially laying out where researchers can report the legal protection they'll have, all of those measures. So I think having that goes a long way. For instance, an explicit safe harbor saying that researchers' work is considered authorized if they follow the terms. So that they can be assured that by working with you, there won't be any kind of harmful effects there if they're following the policy. So I think laying that out well as just really being open in communication. So I think that's one of the biggest parts when I've been participating in these. You'll get some companies that are really great will keep you updated on the status of a vulnerability fix, ask you to retest it when it's done, let you know when it's been fixed, versus others will just tell you they've gotten it and then you don't hear anything again. So I think that most researchers want to be kept in the loop. They want to see that like they didn't just report a vulnerability, but they know how it goes and have that positive feedback effect where, for instance, if they're like credited then as discovering that vulnerability, then they'll want to keep working more with your company. So I think that, of course, there's financial rewards, which can help, but there's a lot more beyond that that I think people look for when they're working in this area.
How often would you want to be contacted or kept up? Like, is every week, every few weeks? What if, like, or maybe does it depend on how long the disclosure is? Or, I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think the more see, the better. So probably if you don't have like anything new to share, then that's not really needed. But if you, for instance, could give like an estimated time frame of when something will be fixed, that could be super helpful. And then we know that we can kind of check in again once we get there. And then if there's been any updates, so if like a fix is applied, you want to make sure that actually fixes it. Or yeah, if it's out there, anything like that, I think is useful. Just to kind of be on the same page with where the vulnerability is.
So there's no real set time, just when things are happening, and like if there's, I like to feel like it's like a medical insurance claim. If I file a medical insurance claim, I'd like to know where it is. That's kind of I feel like it's sort of the same. You put all this time and effort into doing the security research, and then like you're sort of being back paid for it in a way via a bounty program. And so like the information is very helpful. We've had a lot of people tell us that the money is not, like, monetary incentives are not as powerful as just the ongoing communication even. And that just the chance to like talk to a product engineer about that problem is more powerful. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
I wonder if that's like an evolutional thing though, again, like, because I'm just thinking back when I first started in this world and how, you weren't so collaborative with the researchers as much. So.
Was that just you? We always collaborate.
Like,
it's in our goddamn company motto.
Like 9 years ago, just thinking of where I was then.
Yeah, Jack, what were you going to say?
No, I think that kind of, like you were saying, communication really in a lot of cases can be more powerful than the monetary rewards, because just like I've had some cases where again, a phone call with the company and just seeing like that this is of value to them, they see it as actually improving their security. I think that's pretty motivating as a researcher.
No doubt, it's definitely a value. I mean, that's the reason why our teams exist, is to protect the customers. So, we want to work on the issues and get our customers protected. It's our really our whole motivation and goal behind our jobs.
So would it be basically, if we communicate well on what's expected and what we want to have the researchers focus on, we offer clarity in that space, and then we have a good dialogue throughout the reporting timeframe, through the phases that we go through, and even starting with a prequel that explains what our process looks like. You would generally say that we're going to keep ourselves in good relations with the researcher, right? What about in a case where we explain all of that to a researcher and they either don't care or they don't get it? How do you deal with somebody who just doesn't want to really collaborate or coordinate on the disclosure of vulnerability?
What advice would you have to give?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, at least if I'm, thinking of, how we go about, encouraging those people to do more productive disclosures. I think just kind of showing them what is standard in the industry can be kind of useful, of course, because, they could go out, do full disclosure, and just kind of do away with coordinated vulnerability disclosure, but that doesn't really help anyone. So I think just showing them kind of what is standard, for instance, like Google Project Zero lays this out very well, where they say this is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to give you 90 days to fix your vulnerability, and beyond that, we'll go public. So I think just kind of, showing that there is a lot of value to be had in kind of respecting this agreement. And I think ultimately just, kind of the perspective is that this is something that we're both, like, neither of us have to follow to, because this is how both of us get the best outcome. So like the rules are, it's not to help on one side or the other, it's to make sure that this agreement and disclosure process is helpful for everyone. So I think just kind of laying that out, that this is a mutual agreement. The researcher gets potentially payment, legal protection. The company gets to fix the vulnerability. So I think kind of just encouraging people to see what is standard in the industry for research is where I'd start.
Is it confusing though to a researcher to see when, like, CERT says, what does it say? CERT says 45 days and Google Project Zero.
CERT does not say 45 days. I wrote that regulation. It says 45 days to respond. It says we'll give 45 days, and then immediately the next sentence says, except in most situations where 45 days is not actually applicable.
Right, but when the media likes to quote it, they like to quote the line before, which is then what people look at, so that's confusing. And then Google Project Zero says 90 days, but then, a company is like, hey, I need more time. And then you're like, hey, I just want you to get this fixed. I want to figure out my own time. Like, is it confusing when you see all these multiple policies? I mean, what do you have, like, an average time that you, me, Jack, prefer when I work with with a company?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting area in that, there, like, every company might put out a different thing. And I think there certainly can be reasonable kind of causes for needing an extended time frame. What I do suggest to companies, though, is that they kind of start with 90 days as the assumption, and then unless they have, like, sufficient reason to need more time, and then perhaps just communicate that very clearly with the researcher. I think that most of the time, like even if you do have the policy saying like after 90 days you can go public, if the researcher doesn't want to harm anyone, so if you can actually show them that like, hey, this, like, we're doing our best, but this will take X number of days, won't be able to stick to that, I think that the vast majority of the time they'll respect that. So I think really it's just about kind of the reason most of these disclosure timelines exist is so that companies aren't negligent about their security. So if you can show them that you are actually being proactive, you're trying to fix this, then I think that'll help resolve kind of a lot of those conflicts.
Krog, you had a question.
Well, I had a statement and then a question. Since most of the coordinated disclosure in my world is secret for 7 to 14 days, I think other people could step up and do a little quicker probably. But I wanted to flip the script a little bit. You've got folks here with experience in government and a lot of deep enterprise security experience. So from a security researcher standpoint, what are you curious about, like how a large organization works and responds to the security researcher? Anything we could answer from you there?
Great question.
That is, yeah, I think
I have one or two.
Yeah, one component which I think would just be really helpful for me or other people is just like kind of what the process looks like for getting a vulnerability fixed within a large organization, because at places I've worked, it's either like government where you're just telling someone else to fix it, or a very small company where like you're writing the code to fix that. But imagine if it's a organization with thousands or tens of thousands of employees, it's a little more complicated. So yeah, interested to hear kind of just like what that even looks like, who you coordinate with, and how you make sure that gets done.
Good.
Yeah, everyone hates you. That's the answer.
Yeah.
No.
I don't hate you.
Krog and I did a presentation one time, and we wrote up like what we would expect from a researcher, like how better we could play, just about details in the beginning. Because like sometimes you get a report and you don't even know what product they're talking about. And I mean, the company I work for is 140,000 employees and a lot of products. So it's like, the product, the version that you're on, the OS system, just some common type of questions that, if they're given in the beginning, because we don't want to waste your time. And so if and I know you don't want to waste our time, the whole goal is to get it resolved. So making sure you come forward with the right amount of detail in the first place is sort of a key thing.
But I think in the broad strokes, though, the process, right? It's we take in the vulnerability and we do an evaluation of the content of that vulnerability to make sure we have enough information to move forward in the process. We'll eventually triage the vulnerability once we have all that data. And if we determine that it is a security vulnerability, and if it's a security vulnerability, we have certain obligations as a company to take certain actions from there forward. Part of that is coming up with a mitigation strategy. How do we identify, once we've identified, all the products that are affected, how are we going to go about remediating that vulnerability and then executing on that plan, right? What are we going to do for disclosure? What are the lessons learned, right, for that? Coming up with the CVSS score, paying the bug bounty, all of that happens sort of in the middle of the cycle. And then we get into disclosure, which is complicated. For some companies, it is simple, right? All I'm going to do is disclose to the public. For other companies, it's a tiered disclosure process. In fact, even if you back up into the triage and the mitigation phase, you need to sometimes tier that disclosure, because there may be others in the ecosystem that also need to mitigate that vulnerability in order for you, the primary vendor, to mitigate your vulnerability. And then it trickles down into the disclosure phases, where you'll do an NDA disclosure to your customer base and then out to the public. So that can be prolonged.
I think what Josh is saying is it could be very complicated, and the other matter is just sometimes the code is potentially shared amongst more than one product line. And then the product lines have multiple versions. And so, trying to coordinate getting as many customers protected before that disclosure date isn't always easy. And so, just I would say my thing is there's a lot of stuff going in around in the background that and I get it. You just spent all this time researching something, you found it, you meet, you're like, yay, and then we're like, we need 90 days, we need 120. Oh wait, we need a little more because the build broke because of something else, and then you're like, oh my god, just fix this thing. Like I'm already like 3 vulnerabilities past this now. So I yeah.
Well, and it really goes into like, how bad do I have to change my pants after we've had our initial conversation? Was it really bad? And then I need to understand kind of what the scope is. And sometimes, like if you're a large hardware vendor that has a lot of different suppliers, that gets hard to understand kind of what your downstream is. And that's where a lot of that time comes in, trying to coordinate that. But then, like any large software company or hardware company, you're going to have release schedules. So when this problem comes up, you have to balance, how bad is it? How do I have to stop work to fix this? Or can I slow some work down and, kind of have a middle ground for a good release? So it's a big balancing act when you're working with any kind of enterprise class piece of software. Now, if it's something if it's like a website, I found a problem with your mobile app or a portal, that's a little different. Those companies generally can be a little quicker. But when you've got something where you've got a product line that's 1,000 SKUs that has 8-10 years of history behind it, it takes a lot of research to understand exactly how things are impacted throughout those different layers of your offerings.
Yeah, and I guess I'll close up with my thoughts on it and then move to the next question. But so I guess from like my perspective in PCERT, like much as it was in my perspective when I worked with you before, Jack, it's like our job is really to be the advocate for the vulnerability, right? So like we're not really we're trying to balance those relationships. So like all PCERT teams are trying to be the security advocate for that vulnerability, right? So we're trying to balance that like internal and external. We're trying to work the relationship with the researcher to make sure the researcher gets what they need. At the same time, we're trying to go on this treasure hunt. Like Lisa was saying, you may have lots of products. So we have to figure out who developed that product, who's currently responsible for that product. And sometimes that's not as easy as it could be. Just because sometimes companies are really big, or like Crow was saying, they're old. And so you kind of have that.
You have a lot of third-party unknown.
Yeah. Third-party unknowns too. So
like
we
open
have
source.
Yeah, like open source is what I was gonna say,
Vendors.
but you have all of these different pieces, and our job is really to kind of manage those relationships and and then at the same time, like we have to be responsible to our customers, and we still have to be responsible to like our internal stakeholders. Like we have to answer to our leadership, we have to answer to our legal, our communications, our internal development teams, and our business units, right? So like there's a lot of moving pieces. It's not even like juggling, like, if you're juggling like, I don't know, bowling pins. It's more like the guy spinning the plates, on the sticks. Like there's a lot going on there. But anyway, so that's kind of my wrap up to that question. But I did have one kind of question to I think maybe we're getting to the end here. We'll sort of get to closing up, but
2 more questions and then we'll
2
wrap.
more questions. 2 more questions. Okay. So Jack, can you tell us about your favorite story of vulnerability disclosure? A time when you absolutely had a blast, and your favorite vulnerability disclosure story.
Yep. Yeah, I think I can think of a fun one that maybe it wasn't even the most severe, but was just a very, very positive experience. And this was actually with Keybase, which we're using right now. And this was, I pulled up the reports. This was September 7th, 2016. So a little while ago, but I was looking at them and realized that just by I was hitting an API endpoint, and then once I hit it, their website would give a 503, and then I just couldn't use it for the next 30 seconds. And turns out I think that was taking down their entire website. So that part wasn't so positive, just with a single API endpoint. But the fun part was I reported to them, wrote the report, submitted. Literally, when I refreshed it, they had commented saying, "We fixed it, thanks," rewarded me a bounty, and closed it. So that was, I think, the fastest moment from disclosure to having a fix in about 60 seconds. So yeah, to your point, companies maybe could do better. If you're not fixing it within a few minutes, then maybe you're just not going fast enough.
That was an application issue, though.
Yeah. So that was.
They're
Yeah.
significantly easier to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Kidding there, of course. That it's that's a very rare case, but that was just a really fun experience where literally when I refreshed it, they had already fixed it.
That's amazing.
That's impressive.
That is very impressive.
them.
We just gave a shout out to Keybase here, I guess. Oh, okay.
Yep,
I have a harder question, or one that's more controversial. So I am not a fan of proof of concept code being posted the day the fix is finally delivered, because the customers tend to take a while to apply the fixes. So my question is, where are your thoughts with that? Are you willing to postpone, I'm okay if there's a disclosure from a researcher explaining, hey, I'm the one who found this, and this is what I did, and oh yeah, by the way, in a few weeks I'll publish the proof of concept code. What are your thoughts with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a interesting area, and I definitely think that kind of like the entire vulnerability disclosure process is just like I said before, an agreement so that both sides can have better outcomes. And while I don't think you can really control what people do, I do think it's a reasonable thing that as a researcher, like, yes, if it's going out today, there's going to be, I don't know, hundreds of companies that are potentially impacted. They will have to deploy the patch. And I think as a courtesy, that's perfectly reasonable to kind of wait a little to put it out. There still can be a middle ground, I think. Say, like, if you put out a script that doesn't exploit it but tests if the vulnerability is there, I think that could be really useful for companies then to go and see if they're actually vulnerable. So I think that, yes, it's perfectly reasonable, I think, to wait to kind of put out the full exploit, even though you can't really control that. I think that just as a way of kind of letting everyone get the patch in, reducing the possible for immediate harm, I do think that is a useful thing to wait to put that out.
But I'm going to play a little devil's advocate, though. On the flip side, though, for a researcher, the proof of concept is my proof. It's not just that I wrote a bunch of words, but I actually, can demonstrate this, that I discovered this using this technique. So I think this sort of goes back to some of the motivations, right?
I often thought that it was, though, because they thought that the community and everybody could learn better about the proof of concept and the code, and be able to then somebody would be able to better protect themselves because they could see the proof of code and do that. Like, that's what I usually hear as the argument on the flip side of why they want to post it. And I'm all about the community learning. I'm just saying, can't we just learn in 2 weeks, and not that day? But Krob, you were gonna, I think, say something. I'm sorry.
No, I think it's just a difference. As a security team, that proof of concept is invaluable. That helps us understand more precisely what's going on. As a researcher, I see this and I can demonstrate it. And it's very easy for us to say, hey, we agree. Or, hey, researcher, there might be a flaw in your logic and what you're seeing is actually something else. So that really helps. But yeah, I agree that it shouldn't go out at the day of disclosure. There should be a little lag. And I think, that's where the vendor acknowledgement comes in, saying, we worked with this researcher. They did a really awesome job. We appreciate their work. And that kind of, hopefully will satiate the need to have that immediate, kind of public affirmation. And then, the POC can come later, whether that's an academic paper or a conference presentation, whatever it is, it's kind of a dissertation defense or whatever. That can come later, I think, because again, most enterprise customers, if you think corporate security teams and the engineering groups that actually make the patches are slow, just imagine enterprises around the globe that take 30 to 528 days to roll out a fix.
Often those are the ones that are doing your banking and doing your healthcare. So just saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
but Jack, what were your thoughts on it? Because we kind of asked and then didn't follow up.
Yeah. I think that, there's definitely tons of value in having I think we're on the same page here in having a proof of concept out there at some point, because it's not like attackers aren't going to be able to figure it out anyways, and going to start using it. So I think, having that out there does help. Red team in actually demonstrating like this is why it needs to be fixed right now. But I think I agree that there isn't really it doesn't need to be out the day of, because people are going to still, no matter what, they're going to need some time to get the patches out there, to verify that they're in place. And I don't think that really changes whether the exploit is out there. I think that certainly having it out there is very positive, but I would agree that it can wait a little to come out.
Yeah, that's kind of one of those things that's really, I guess, when you start thinking about, we used to joke about it all the time that there was Patch Tuesday, and then there was Exploit Wednesday, and then there was For Sale Thursday, because you start seeing the exploits be created and based on that proof of concept, and then they just start getting sold. And so when you're a big enterprise company, sometimes that lag exists, and trying to prioritize your patch management system can be overwhelming. So, but anyway, so I think all of the kind of questions that we asked today and all of the different thoughts that we have are sort of demonstrate the fact that the world has changed a lot in the last, I would say, 15, 20 years. I was asked to do a panel on the evolution of bug bounties, and I was looking up some of the details about it. And I guess the first bug bounty was really, the first widely accepted bug bounty was in 1995, and it was a Netscape bug bounty program. And I think that kind of goes to show that the CVE program wasn't even created until 1999. And then it wasn't widely adopted until at least 2010. So leaps and bounds, I think that we've changed as a community as far as evolving and different cultural mindsets. I think that having these kinds of discussions wasn't even something that we regularly did before. And I know Lisa kind of talked about it before, that 10 years ago, having a conversation with a researcher was something that most companies weren't even allowed to do. And so it's kind of neat that we can sort of have these conversations and really work together collaboratively. And so I'm so excited that you could join us today, Jack, and thank you for coming. And I think with all of that, we'll close it up. And so we want to thank everyone for listening and taking the time to be with us here today. And as always, we'll see you next time.